You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
This episode of Mission Log is brought to you by listeners like you, supporters on Patreon. Join us today at patreon.com/missionlog.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, episode 443, Ex Post Facto.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm Norman Lau.
And I'm John Champion. Each week on Mission Log, we explore an episode of Star Trek, examining it for morals, meanings, and messages, and seeing if our point of view can hold up under Vulcan cross-examination.
This week, Ex Post Facto, the one where Star Trek Voyager meets Double Indemnity, and well, as the saying goes, at least someone will always have Paris.
We'll get back to Ex Post Facto in a moment, right after Norman tells all of you about the other factos of how you can stay in touch with us.
Mission Log is a conversation about Star Trek. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on Twitter and Facebook at MissionLogPod. While you're at it, leave us a review and a rating at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. And remember, your comments could be used on Mission Log or Engage on the Roddenberry YouTube channel. And now, fresh from implantation with all of this episode's trivia, here once again is John Champion.
Why, thank you for that. Let's talk trivia for Ex Post Facto. We have a story by Evan Carlos Summers, and you may remember that Evan wrote 3 episodes of DS9, notably Melora, which paralleled Evan's own experience as a quadriplegic after an accident when he was a teenager. Later on, Evan produced and directed a documentary of some acclaim about his life called The Seeker. We lost Evan in 2010. So while Evan gets both the story and teleplay credit here, he conceived many of the more sci-fi elements of this story. It was Michael Piller, also with a teleplay credit, who really set about scripting and finding the mood of the episode. The film noir elements were his influence. Also important to know that this script was written very early in Voyager's development, before Robbie had been cast as Paris, which means it relied more heavily on some of the early character descriptions, like Paris being a womanizer. It was directed by LeVar Burton, not someone who needs an introduction here, but it is worth noting that this is the first time a former TNG star has directed an episode of Voyager. It was Burton, along with producer David Livingston, who really got into the creative side of the film noir aesthetic. Burton had at one point thought about shooting it all in black and white, but they decided ultimately to let those scenes be the flashback sequences only. Now let's talk a little bit about recycling in production. It happens. We know that it does, especially in Star Trek. The matte painting of the Benian city has been used many times on Star Trek. It goes all the way back to TNG's first season episode, Angel 1. And the ships used by the Namiri are so common as to be pretty generic at this point. You have to go back to TNG again for its debut in The Most Toys, and from there, well, it shows up in various guises on TNG, DS9, and now Voyager. Our cast spotlight this week turns to Robert Picardo as the Doctor, and, well, he's our Doctor here, coincidentally, but Bob was almost a doctor in real life. He grew up in Philadelphia, went to college at Yale, where, yes, he intended to study medicine. But then he started acting and found himself on Broadway in pretty short order, and ever since those days in the mid-'70s has pretty successfully bounced around from stage to screens, both big and small. It's nearly impossible to sum up his career or even favorite roles here. On TV, audiences saw a lot of Bob on the acclaimed China Beach, as well as The Wonder Years. Later, sci-fi fans welcomed him to Stargate SG-1 and Atlantis in recurring roles. On the big screen, he left an impression in Inner Space as the cowboy. Bob originally auditioned for Neelix when Star Trek came calling. They switched it up, and he improvised some of the famous "I'm a doctor, not a, fill-in-the-blank" line, which made the casting directors really take notice. And yes, Bob is a singer from his college days in an a cappella group to Broadway. We'll probably see a bit of that as time goes on. And we also want to mention that Bob is a member and on the board of directors of the Planetary Society, so go check them out at planetary.org. Let's meet our guest cast. On the Benean homeworld, we meet a few locals. The Doctor, who remains nameless, is played by Aaron Lustig. This is the first of his 2 Star Trek appearances. The next one will be on Enterprise. He's been working regularly since the mid-'80s on everything from comedies to dramas and soap operas, and a few feature films in the mix too, like Darkman, Edward Scissorhands, and The Day After Tomorrow. Francis Guinan plays Cray, the Minister of Science. He's got 3 Trek appearances total, 2 on Voyager, 1 on Enterprise. He's another actor whose work spans multiple genres and can be seen in features like Constantine and Speed 2. Like many actors we've discussed, though, he has a huge background in live theater, spending a lot of time in Chicago at the famed Steppenwolf Company, where he is an ensemble member and has been nominated for multiple of the prestigious Jeff Awards. The ill-fated Talon Wren is played by Ray Reinhardt, and you have absolutely seen him in a more natural-looking treatment when he was Admiral Aaron in the TNG Season 1 episode Conspiracy. Reinhardt is from New York and started his on-screen professional career in the late 50s, and he has appeared in some genre and popular films like Time After Time, written and directed by Nick Meyer, and you can catch him in another favorite, The Hunt for Red October. Finally, Liddell Wren is played by Robin McKee. Her pro-acting resume isn't too long, though there are some interesting mentions in there. She did appear on an episode of the TV series Weird Science. She was in the first Speed movie, and she was in a comedy called Wagons East alongside Robert Picardo and Ethan Phillips the year before this episode of Voyager was produced.
I forget. Is the instinct basic or fatal? Is the attraction fatal or basic? Never mind. Let's hear John do the recap.
Prologue. It was a dark and stormy night. Tom Paris is reliving a memory, guided by an unknown voice. He sees a dog, a rainstorm through the windows of a conservatory, and himself in an embrace with an alien woman. Another voice, Talon, confronts Tom as the blurry images, overlaid with some alien text, plays out. Talon is the woman's husband, and over Tom's objections, accuses him of stealing her, then stating that he'll report it all to Captain Janeway. Tom, both in real life and in the memory, continues to object. This isn't the way it happened. But the memory plays out, and Tom very clearly lunges toward Talon, stabbing and killing him. Cut back to real time. A sweaty, anxious Tom Paris is being read his sentence by an alien authority to live out his victim's last moments every 14 hours for the rest of his life. Act 1. On the USS Voyager, Cass is in a meeting with the EMH, working on her medical education, but also contemplating a name for himself, something inspirational, historical, perhaps. His thoughts are interrupted by a call from the bridge that a shuttle is returning with one injured crewman. It's Harry Kim, who was forced to leave the Benia homeworld without Tom. Kim is in rough shape, but he does manage to explain that the two of them were working with Talon Wren, who is a Benean physicist, helping them with an engineering issue that diverted Voyager there in the first place. Everything was fine. Voyager's visitors welcomed by the Ministry of Science and Talon Wren, who even invited Tom and Harry to his home for dinner. They meet his wife, Liddell, who immediately catches Tom's eye, but she's abrasive at the very idea that her husband has brought uninvited guests. He's a workaholic. She's had enough. Even the excuse of the war that their world is engaged in with the Namiri seems to be a convenience to take Talon's attention away from Liddell. She excuses herself from the dinner table, bored with the talk of the war, the Voyager shuttle evading Namiri patrols, and the work that remains to be done. Later that night, Harry and Talon were at work while Tom's mind and eyes wandered. They saw each other the next day, too, when Professor Tolan Wren was murdered. But Harry wasn't allowed to see his shipmate again. Tom Paris was accused of murdering a brilliant scientist and expert on Benean warships. Harry was sequestered, interrogated for 2 days, and sent home. Now all Janeway can do is set a course for the Benean homeworld. Act 2. Captain Janeway consults with Neelix about the rather delicate situation with Lieutenant Paris. Neelix knows the danger of approaching the Benean world and the likelihood that they will be confronted by aggressive Numiri warships. Soon enough, the Numiri arrive in a single patrol vessel. The captain of that ship is straightforward. Voyager will be committing an act of war if it in any way aids the Beneans, but Janeway assures him they are only interested in rescuing their crewmen. Very well, and the Numiri patrol ship is out. Arriving at their destination, Janeway and Tuvok confront the Benean Minister of Science, Cray, about Paris's condition. He was convicted and punished with their method, isolated memory engrams from the victim, hosting those for evidence in the trial, and then transplanted into the perpetrator to relive the experience for the remainder of his life. Now it's Tom's turn to recount his version of the story to Janeway and Tuvok. Yes, he and Harry met Tolan Wren at his house, and yes, Liddell seemed very distant from her husband. Tom wanted to talk to her, and she expressed her displeasure with Tolan. They get closer. It gets flirty. But the story is interrupted when Tom starts to experience the memory engrams again. They're painful, knocking him unconscious since there were issues matching the engrams to a human brain. Janeway convinces the minister to allow her to bring Paris back to Voyager where, potentially, his neurological trauma can be addressed, with a promise that they won't leave until Paris is exonerated. Act 3. In sickbay, the EMH reports that the Benean procedure is causing serious damage the longer Paris experiences the playback of those engrams. Tuvok has an idea, though. He'd like to use an autonomic response analysis when he next questions Paris. If he's telling the truth about not killing Wren, then either Liddell is lying, or somehow Tolan is, from beyond the grave. Tuvok also pays a visit to the Wren household, greeted by Liddell's dog that doesn't like strangers. Not that that's super important or anything. He interviews Liddell about the murder. Curiously, she's staying in the same home right where it all happened, and she opens up to Tuvok about how their marriage was over long ago. Tom just gave her the push that she needed to tell Tolan on that day that she was leaving him. According to Liddell, she found Tom at the Engineering Institute after she broke the news to her husband. They left, walked home in the rain, because, remember, it was also a dark and stormy night, and then things got slightly more intimate. And by intimate, I mean she made tea, they watched the storm, and then Tolan came home when Tom murdered him. That's the story, and she's sticking with it. Tuvok is called back to Voyager as Lieutenant Paris is waking up. He doesn't remember anything past the tea, except waking up in a cell. And according to the EMH's system, Paris is telling the truth. The Numiri have shown up again, though, and they are less chatty than they were last time. No words are exchanged, just weapons fire from 2 Numiri ships, and while Voyager is holding its own defensively, Chakotay suggests a Maquis tactic he and B'Elanna picked up. They fake some damage, and then when those ships get close enough, open up fire to disable the attackers. It works. They're gone. For now. Turning our attention back to the murder investigation, Tuvok says that Paris is convinced he's telling the truth, so without additional evidence, maybe it's time for him to take a more dramatic step, entering into a mind meld with Paris to experience the engram memory himself. Given what the Benean procedure is doing to Tom's brain already, it's a risk for Tuvok to meld, but he makes the case that this might be the only way to prove his innocence. Tuvok does indeed meld with Lieutenant Paris and sees the memory of the murder from Tolan's point of view play out. It's painful, but Tuvok comes away unscathed and with the need to see Harry Kim right away. Kim was working with Professor Wren and knows his research. That could reveal who killed the professor and why the Numiri attacked. Act 5. Janeway calls the Minister of Science, who is joined by a Benean doctor. She explains that Paris's implants must be removed as they are causing such severe neurological damage, and the Benean officials agree. They'll come up with some alternative, and in a show of good faith, Janeway dispatches Paris and Kim in a shuttle back to the Benean homeworld. Of course, a Namiri ship is there to intercept, and outgunned, they allow the shuttle to be captured. A boarding party of Namiri step in, identifying Tom Paris specifically, and before they can do anything, the two are beamed out of there and back to Voyager. Then it's time for Janeway to give the Namiri an ultimatum. Release the shuttle, or she'll blow it up, taking out the Namiri ship with it. They relent. Now Voyager, with the crew and shuttle back, carry on to orbit the Benean planet. Tuvok assembles all interested parties at the Wren household to drop his bomb. Paris was not the man who Tolan Wren saw. The engrams were altered. Not only that, but Liddell is lying, and probably spiked Paris's tea. Tuvok has Paris and Liddell stand next to each other. Paris is taller than her, but the images in the engram were of someone who was equal to Liddell's height. Plus, the killer precisely stabbed Tolan in the heart, a piece of physiology a human wouldn't know. There's another detail. The stream of symbols at the bottom of the engram. Paris assumed it was just part of the process, but indeed, it was an encoded message intended for the Namiri, who had also worked so hard to capture Paris. Someone on the inside was passing along information about his movements to those Namiri. And there's only one person it could be, the Doctor. He's the one who knew the process for the engrams. He's the one who knew Paris's whereabouts. And he's the one who allowed him to leave the planet. He also happens to be the same height as Liddell, which means, all along, the engrams were altered. It's a fake! The Doctor will hear none of it. But Tuvok has just one more thing. Liddell's dog. Nika runs in and immediately runs up to the Doctor, clearly not afraid of a stranger. Tom Paris is free to go, presumably with those implants taken out of his head, and long after the incident, he thanks Tuvok in the mess hall for his investigative skills. Tuvok tells him, though, had he been guilty, he would have pursued the truth just as vigilantly. And while Tuvok prefers solitude, Tom Paris lets him know that he made a friend today. The end.
A riveting review and recap there, John.
Well,
riveting.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Norman.
You know, one thing that we haven't done for a while, and certainly not since we started covering Voyager, we haven't done the title game in a while. So it's time for the title game.
The title game. Yes, please.
Because ex post facto is very specific and it's Latin, I thought I would just try and inform everyone to put the understanding of the title like in the context of what we're going to say. So, from the Cornell School of Law website, the definition of ex post facto means what it's Latin for from a thing done afterward. And to expound upon that, ex post facto is most typically used to refer to a criminal statute that punishes actions retroactively, thereby criminalizing conduct that was legal when originally performed.
Excellent. I'm glad that you brought that up. It's also a good kind of logical fallacy when you talk about ex post facto reasoning, where you're using the outcome to sort of justify whatever happened before when sometimes those aren't related. So I love that you did that. And by the way, our boss will be very happy because Rod always likes us to do the title explanation, title game when we can. I'm just going to go ahead and say that an episode like The Cloud didn't need that.
I tried, but Cornell School of Law had nothing for it.
Had nothing for The Cloud. Weird.
No.
All right, well, let's walk through it. You know, the opening of this episode, definitely an homage to noir murder mysteries. And I do like those cuts back to Tom lying there with that one bead of sweat. It had a very, like, Total Recall feel to it. And he's convincing. His agitation is convincing, I thought.
And speaking of cuts, seeing you as you, like the person who's doing the stabbing, but also the person who's receiving the stabbing in that point of view, very interesting stylistic choice. That did get my attention. I'm like, where are they going with this?
Yeah. Yeah. And look, speaking of somebody who does not like to listen to himself or watch himself in playback, it would be even worse to watch me stab somebody. So I feel for him right away.
Was that your penance then? That would be your penance too?
That would be. It's just to have to watch myself. Yeah, that would be terrible. Now, I will say that as a set design note, I really appreciate that it revives some of those next-gen era wall panels with the diagonal stripes on half of them. Those are great, used throughout the Benian homeworld. So, look, we're far away in the Delta Quadrant, but they had some connection to some interesting wall design. And I will say, for all the experimentation and kind of flexing artistic muscles with the noir style in this, I really like that bit of cinematography of the scene at the beginning with the EMH and Kess sitting at the desk. Love that when you get a nice moving camera around them. It's just really nice. It gives some life to that. And, of course, I love the in-joke of naming the 3 historic doctors. Galen, Jonas Salk, and then Dr., not Mr. Spock, Dr. Spock. Because as a Star Trek fan, and I'm sure you felt it too, the frustration of people calling Mr. Spock Dr. Spock.
And certainly of a generation where the boomer generation would have had Dr. Spock because he was
Baby Doctor. Yep. That's the one.
Baby Doctor.
Yep.
Yeah. I like that scene quite a bit too. And I also like that they looked like they were playing Battleship with their computer consoles facing
each other.
Facing each other.
Yeah.
But I'm paying more attention now to like what is on these props, and they had actual like interactive LCARS displays that are starting to become a little bit more developed, and especially in sickbay, when you're seeing it like say on Tom's bio bed and on some of the wall panels later, the production value is looking really, really nice. And on the DVDs, the quality of the DVDs allow you to really look at them, and they're really nice, seamless, vacuum formed, plastiform or plastic props that are being used, which are really nice.
Yeah. But they have a good, like, real world look to them, And I will say that this is one of those places where it's good to have a guy like Neelix around. Look, we're not going to dump on Neelix all the time. I swear. We'll definitely find all of those places that we like him, as we have pointed out thus far on our foray into Voyager. But this is one of those where at least he can point out to you the good guys, in this case the Benians, instead of the bad guys, a.k.a. the Numiri, just in case the difference in makeup wasn't a tip-off. I mean, that would be the first thing. You just see them coming, you're like, oh, we're going to side with the Benians. Look how adorable they are with their bird feathers on their heads, which brings me to that makeup. Okay, look, I never want to besmirch all of the excellent work done by the artists who worked on Star Trek. Sometimes they don't have good days. It's high pressure. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of design to be cranked out. This episode was one or several of those days. I got to say that I think that Hawk on Buck Rogers looked better.
That was the same parallel that I drew.
How could you not? Yeah.
I mean, you had a completely like a feather domed, type of prosthetic going on. I get what they're going for. And you're right. Not everyone's going to be winners.
Yeah.
Everyone tries to put their best foot forward, but we're looking, we're talking about the law of averages here of like what, say, Michael Westmore and his department are trying to put together on a weekly, yearly basis, right?
Yeah.
I'm surprised that things like turn out as good as they do all the time on a consistent basis versus, say, like one of these like offshoots.
Exactly.
That don't. When they finally like bring Harry back and then he's in sickbay, the captain just like walks right at him. Is like, what happened to Tom? He's like, oh, hi, Captain. I'm okay.
Yeah, right.
In case anyone cares.
Oh, God.
Right? Can I get a glass of water?
Yeah. Let's hope that those are just lines that had to get cut out. Like that's the part we didn't see. There's some missing footage there that's like, Harry, are you okay? We were worried about you. Go ahead. Right.
It's like blah, 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 blah. Oh, hi, Kate. Right. And I know this is 90s science fiction, and I know that in some cases, and I do agree, like the opening sets and stuff like that looked very, very good. But when we got to the minister's office, I'm like, dude, this is like my dentist's office from like the 1990s. So like, again, with some of the makeup and the prosthetics, they don't really hit the mark. Sometimes alien world becomes 90s dental office.
Just very... Hey, and sometimes a 90s dentist office becomes Star Trek. If you watch Trekkies, you know what I mean. Okay, look, we will have many comments and criticisms and maybe some praise for this episode. I do want to talk about, you know, the dialogue is very stylistic, for better or for worse. Sometimes in this episode it really fires, sometimes it doesn't. I love the exceedingly passive-aggressive dialogue with Tolan and Liddell right from the start because it's so uncomfortable and so real. Like,
it's fine, John. It's fine. Whatever. It's fine.
Okay. Well, you know, okay, then I guess we'll just move on. It's fine. I have nothing else to say about it.
It's perfect. Okay. Really. That's fine. So. Okay, so that's great. You know, I have no problem with that. It's when Tolan says, "Good doggy," to an actual dog.
Yeah.
Like, again, with the whole like 90s dentist's office, and there's just things that it takes you out of the illusion. When you say something earthbound like doggy to an actual dog-looking creature, you're like, all right, well, where am I? Am I like, you know, on Earth, just, you know, in, say, an ambassador's apartment or something?
Yeah.
Or in the Delta Quadrant. It should be just a little stranger.
Yeah, well, exactly. And that's sort of the rough thing about Star Trek. You have to reinvent. You have to come up with a new world and a whole new civilization around the people on that world every single week. Or not. We can talk about good examples of not having to do that. We'll get to that.
It's perfect. It's fine. Whatever. It's fine.
But look, I agree with you because in Star Trek's long history of space dogs, you can now supplement Unicorn Dog with Mohawk Dog. That's who we meet in this episode. And speaking of alien cultures, I will, you know, look, for as conventional as a lot of the Benean stuff might be, look, in the Wren household, they don't just have a liquor cabinet, they have a space liquor cabinet.
Right.
So that's, you know, we give them credit where that's due.
I mean, obviously, they have space liquor cabinet because it was furnished by Champion
Catering.
So you would have your space utensils and your space napkins along with your space liquor cabinet.
Yeah, which is full of space liquor. So,
right.
Of
course.
And you can tell because it's brightly colored. By the way, so I did mention in the trivia, because it is worth keeping in mind for this episode, that this was written before Tom Paris had really been fleshed out. What is his problem? I mean, look, there are many problems, but literally, like, his whole, even just says it straight up to anybody who will listen to him, like, oh, this is so boring. I'm not going to do the thing that I was assigned to do, losers. You know, like, that's, wow.
I have so much to say about it. I rarely ever say this, John. I rarely ever say this about anything in Star Trek. I find the word hate to be a very, very specific, very powerful word.
Yeah.
I hate that scene.
Yeah, as you should. Yeah.
And I will go into that a lot later.
Okay.
So Liddell, that whole sequence with her playing the femme fatale with the cigarette.
Yeah.
When she said, you know, the whole like scene hinges on good can get very boring. I rolled so hard at that scene, I could literally see my tonsils.
That is quite the eye roll, man. Yeah, that is. And look, it is worth pointing out that, all of this stuff is based on multiple film noir and then even neo-noir from the time. So there's a lot of that influence here, but the question will always be like, does it work or not? We'll get to that in our wrap-up as well. I love how Tuvok asks the EMH for his reports, and the EMH is like, oh, it's too complicated for you. Like, dude, okay, have you met Vulcans? Because let me tell you.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, those are kind of good moments because, you know, like Tim and Bob, they're good together. Like, they act well together. So
yeah, of course.
That's super funny.
Yeah.
So let me get this straight. I just want to put it all on the table here, the logic of it.
Yeah.
We're going to punish an alien outsider with our law of chemically implanting alien memories into his human brain, And there might be problems with it, so that you might have to beam them up back to their own surgeon to study and observe.
Yeah.
Like, is everyone on that planet an idiot?
Yeah. Well, you may have hit the nail on the head there. Yeah.
Investigator Tuvok is best Tuvok. You cannot persuade Investigator Tuvok, not even with feminine wiles, because good is boring.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Oh, and I don't know how you felt about this. I mean, we are dealing with an era of Trek that is very specific. So that entire sequence with Liddell taking off Tom's boots and wearing soaked, clingy white clothing and then kneeling down in front of him. I'm not a prudish person, but that's pretty racy, for 1995. But I was waiting for I am 16 going on 17 just to save the scene.
There you go. Just bring it back to something more wholesome. No, it was a sexy scene. I mean, I got it, I'll give them their due where they earned it. That for as inconsistent an episode as this is, that was quite a scene. Speaking of inconsistencies, I love Chakotay's Maquis trick, which just seems to be a great trick to use up some effects budget for the episode because they needed some spaceships. So they did it, And I love, there is a great, that great bit where Chakotay says, well, it worked against those Starfleet runabouts. And Janeway says, you're lucky I wasn't commanding one of them. And slow clap. And that was such a great Janeway, almost Kirk-like moment. Chef's kiss, Janeway.
I love that scene because she's pushing back. She's like, when someone says, I beat you this way, it's like, well, if I rolled a 20, I would have won. Of course you would have. Of course you would have.
You're right.
But even like the great part of that whole scene was, when Chakotay says, I have an idea. I haven't tried it yet. We're under fire. What could go wrong? And Jane was like, go for it.
Yeah.
I'm like,
right? Yeah. Pretty cool. Yeah. And I do, going back to the EMH and Tuvok, I love the EMH saying to Tuvok, I know more about mind melds than you do. Because, look, it is totally in character for these two to have that conversation that they're having. And I love the idea, which you've talked about on Mission Log from way back in the beginning, just the idea of a computer being able to analyze vastly more data than any person could. And that is one of the strengths, yet also one of the worries about that ability. It's very cool.
I love how there is kind of like that scientific approach to what the Doctor's saying, but also there's the mysticism of saying mind meld. I love Neelix in this. He's like, mind what? What?
Yeah. You needed that.
That was super funny.
Yeah. Oh, man, I love, again, Janeway with the great moments here. Short, but great moments. She's just like, yeah, look, I'm going to blow up your ship in 30 seconds in transmission. Yeah.
Corbomite maneuver style Janeway right there.
Exactly. And
they should have busted out some Tranya.
They should. That would have been the way to do it. And you know where you get the space Tranya? You get it out of your space liquor cabinet.
Oh, furnished by Champion Catering.
Why can't Tom just do a Dixon Hill thing in the holodeck like a normal person? It would save everyone so much trouble.
We will get right back to Ex Post Facto, but first, a thanks to you, our supporters on Patreon at patreon.com/missionlog. Norman, our Patreon community keeps growing, and it's like every day we see new sign-ups and people who are finding what we have to offer there. It's the early access to our shows, kind of behind-the-scenes moments, and most importantly, the word can't be overstated enough, the community. And it's a community that we are very proud of.
And when we first started doing this, John, like you and I just wanted to have these virtual conventions during the COVID lockdown. I think we started having some just general meetups on Zoom, and then it became a little bit more regular. And then we decided, you know what, it would be great if we could just afford our patrons and people that subscribe to us and supported us the ability to be able to forge this community and create like little mini conventions, little get-togethers, and it just blossomed into so much more.
Yeah, and it's awesome because now every week, well, every day, we know that there's activity in the Mission Log Discord that is exclusive to that community. But then we get to do our live hangouts there and chat about episodes, chat about whatever is on your minds in a fun, relaxed, and very friendly environment. So there's so much to our Patreon, whether you're there for the swag or you're there to get the behind the scenes and exclusive content that we post there, or to hang out in the Discord. You can get all of that for as little as $1 a month. There are discounts if you do a yearly subscription. So come check it out, patreon.com/missionlog. And I want to say a special thanks to some of our newest members at Patreon. There's Theron, Jamma, Gail, Alex, Laura, Ellie, Denny, Andy. Thank all of you, and thank everybody who has signed up at patreon.com/missionlog. I hope we will see you there. All right, Norman, should we do the serious stuff first? I mean...
Isn't it all serious, though?
I guess it is. I mean...
Are we the ones that aren't just taking it so seriously?
Well, look, I think we can run into the trap of being sort of blinded by the stylistic shortcomings, let's say. So, going all the way back to those notoriously, quote-unquote, bad episodes of Star Trek, like, can you find good stuff to talk about in Spock's brain? Sure. I'm not saying that this is Spock's brain, but this might be a complicated episode to approach. But I do think there are some cool ideas to talk about in this. And if we can separate ourselves from the style a little bit, I think right out of the gate, there's this very interesting science fiction idea about crime and punishment. And the thought that kind of went through my mind was asking myself, is the Benean sentence, is that a cruel and unusual punishment? And I think back to our friend Chief O'Brien, Miles O'Brien, in Hard Time, who was given this psychological punishment that was very different from just the idea of a physical punishment. Now, it did have physical ramifications, obviously, but it's a kind of torture. It is a psychological torture. But at the same time, can you make a case that this kind of punishment is more humane or maybe more fair? So let's talk it through. There's one way to go: incarceration, or to an extreme, like a death penalty, a physical punishment like that. Is something like this what the Beneans do? Is this what we would want to see in terms of a punishment, where the perpetrator actually has to live and, more importantly, feel what their victims experienced? I mean, isn't that the kind of satisfaction that we want? Or is wanting that a little too vindictive, is a little too eye for an eye? Not that somebody would be locked away, although there can definitely be value to that, but rather that the perpetrator actually feels what they've done. Is that bad enough, or is it the over and over part that's bad enough? What do you think?
Well, there are sentences akin to what you're talking about in real time today where criminals have to report to the family on the anniversary of the crime that they committed if they took that family member's life. Say, for instance, criminal X murdered innocent Y. And I hate to put it in these terms, but I'm trying to make kind of like a clinical analysis of what we're talking about. That person, that criminal, with underneath court-appointed supervision, has to visit that family and atone for the life that they have stolen from that family. And I have heard that, with varying degrees of success, that is therapeutic on both sides.
Oh, interesting.
You can't. We were talking about this on Phage, where a murder isn't rectified by another taking of life. Janeway can't. She wouldn't be able to save Neelix by murdering the other Verdean. One wrong or two wrongs don't necessarily make a right, when it comes to justice or pursuing, a way of rectifying a wrong. So there's a certain sense of healing that was going on between the criminal and the family because there was a loss. a huge loss in that very raw, empty space that allowed both the criminal and the family to heal through that loss. Is it the perfect solution? Of course not. The perfect solution would be not having that crime have been committed at all.
Of course.
But it did.
Yeah.
So here's another thing that I thought of regarding crime and punishment. And this is very much akin to, one, what they're doing here, two, being in general science fiction-esque. The Kafka-esque quality of reliving the crime as described in The Penal Colony, which was published in 1919, where the crime is inscribed on the criminal's body over the course of several hours as they slowly die from their wounds. The dying criminal usually experiences some type of epiphany after a few hours of slow death at the hands of the device.
Okay, so look, the epiphany comes, but then they die. So what value is the epiphany? This is sort of it's sort of a trope in movies, and I think that's why, popular fiction is the way it is, why it is popular, why it takes root, is because there's a kind of fantasy fulfillment that sees the bad guy get their comeuppance, but they get their comeuppance in a way that they understand what they did. And that's really what, the right side, the correct side, the good. I mean, I'm using terms like good and bad very loosely here, but I'm just, we're talking about very black and white characters, situations that play out in movies and TV shows and some popular fiction, is that we want to see the one who has done wrong actually understand the reason, the reasons behind what they're doing and the effects that they're having. And there's something maybe satisfying about just seeing the bad guy dispatched and gone, but that is less satisfying than actually winning the day by seeing them actually get it. And if by this horrific thing that you're describing, that they get it, but then they die, well, whose purpose does that serve? Well,
I guess it really depends on what that epiphany is. Like, what's the definition of that? Did they understand? And but the moment
the
before
epiphany
they
is
die,
thank goodness I'll be dead
over,
soon, so I don't have to go through this anymore.
But there's a certain sense of vengeance in that justice, which again, describing the audience and what the audience wants. But there's also another interesting concept to say, like what Tom is going through. They implanted engrams of the murder into his brain. Now, this is dealing with a moral person, so what happens if you do that to somebody who's already a sociopath or a psychopath? It doesn't change them.
Right.
It's kind of like throwing gasoline on a fire, right? It just gives them more opportunity to maybe even critique their own technique, like, oh, that was really sloppy of me. I should do this differently next time. If there's a next time, right? And also, again, with Tom, going back to the Kafka-esque example, what's happening to Tom is that eventually he would have perished because their engram technique doesn't fit human physiology, which is why he's having the issue that he's having later on in the episode. This is why that Tuvok had to mind meld with him in order to get those engrams out of his system. Right.
I mean, I think it's such an interesting conceit, because I do think that generally, if you look at the course of human history, we fail over and over again with some sort of reasonable version of crime and punishment. Our punishments tend to be way out of scale with what those crimes are, or ideally, what you want is for people to be rehabilitated, understand the situation so that they can then become productive members of society and not just wasting away and taking up resources in a prison somewhere. And this seems like it's an idea that the Beneans think is helpful, they think is progressive and productive. You can take somebody who committed a crime, you're not going to lock them up, you're not going to take them away from their families, you're not going to do all this, but you will make them relive and on this visceral, emotional level, relive and truly understand the consequences of their actions. At the same time, it could either be horrific torture or, as you're pointing out, lost. could be completely lost on the person on whom it's administered,
Or over time, they could become so calloused to it that it wouldn't even matter.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. Could you get to a point where somebody could just sit there and take the torture and not be tortured by it?
Like, I get it. I did wrong, but showing me this again in my brain isn't going to make it any less so.
Yeah. There's another couple of ideas floating around in this episode, and one, I really don't have notes on it, but I do just want to sort of tag that this episode gets into a couple of ideas that are interesting. First of all, what Tuvok is asking of the Doctor is a lie detector, and which are notoriously inaccurate and unreliable. But I guess by the 24th century, we're saying, well, maybe there's some basis in this. We just have to go with it, that this is a technology that is allowable and accepted by them. But I would still be very wary of that. And then this idea of false memories, though, because I like that Tuvok says, well, Mr. Paris believes what he is saying. Sure. And that is a very important distinction there, that Tuvok has not made up his mind yet about the truth of, the nuts and bolts of the case that he's investigating. But at least he's gotten past that barrier to say that, well, regardless of what actually happened, Paris believes what he is saying. And that's where things get very disturbing and can be very malleable when it comes to relying on memory, when it comes to actually trying to solve a crime or get to the truth at a certain matter. So I thought it was cool that we dipped into that a wee bit.
I also liked the logic of the mind meld being used to try and sift through what is the actual truth versus what the engrams have Tom believe is the actual truth. Like, I understand what the Doctor was saying. Like, the Doctor is saying, like, I understand how mind meld works more than you do scientifically, because I have like thousands of Vulcan doctors, information past and present into my head, so I can pull from that. And I was like, yeah, so where are you getting at with this, Doc? And he's like, oh, Tuvok is going to do a mind meld on a person whose memories have been chemically altered to believe a certain truth actually exists, as opposed to try and pull the actual truth out. So there's like digging through layers and layers and layers of memories. And what would that do to Tuvok? Now I see like what the Doctor was saying. Like, oh, sure. Yeah, you're not just flipping a page. You're like reading an entire book and trying to sift out what the truth is. What will that do to you? Yeah. Right? I don't know.
Yeah.
There's no way of knowing.
Let's talk about what I think is probably the moment that was most interesting to you and me.
Right, we came about this independently, which means that's really interesting in this episode.
And it's such a blip in the episode because it happens at the top and then not to be revisited. And that is the Doctor saying, holograms are not capable of choosing. Skip ahead a little bit. It's all programs upon programs upon programs. And Cass saying, I base decisions on information stored inside my brain. How is that so different from the way you access your programs? And I love that we are staying with this train of thought from episode to episode, building slowly, and that they are truly exploring the nature of not just the Doctor, but our own organic intelligence and thought processes. We said it before that we are biological machines with, quote, programming that compels us to make certain decisions. That it's such a short moment, so approachable and understandable, and says so much.
Yeah. This, to me, I think is the saving throw for this episode. This is a hard roll 20, with no modifiers. I've been playing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons like online recently, so it's in my brain.
Good.
But this is absolutely marvelous to watch. It's at the heart of Star Trek DNA, right? Exploring, boldly going not just to outer space, but to inner space as well.
Yeah.
Think about what's being said. Like Cass is saying, I base decisions, as you said, John, on information stored inside my brain. Now, from the moment we are born, I mean, that's the tabula rasa theory, that we do not know anything until stimuli begins to forge our thoughts. And then we start to learn words. And then we start to learn higher concepts of theories and programs right? Programs, constructs that make you behave in a certain way, politically, religiously, sexually, humanitarily.
Yeah.
All of these just don't happen. They happen because you are have either made a set of choices, or those choices have been made for you that now your set of choices are being built upon. That's programming.
Yeah.
Whether we know it or not.
Absolutely. Yeah. The framework that is your brain has certain limitations, and it's very easily malleable by the outside stimulus that you get. I mean, that is just simply what we are and how we operate. And I love when Star Trek can go down this route and do what science fiction does very well, which is hold up this thing that is this miraculous scientific construct like an EMH doctor with this infinite access to information, dealing with the nature of existence and decision-making and identity, but absolutely use that as a mirror to something that is so essentially human. It's the brilliance of a character like Spock or Data, and here it is playing out perfectly with the EMH.
The great thing about this is, like, the most terrifying thing to most people is a choice, making a choice.
Yeah.
And that's what the Doctor and Kes are kind of studying here. It's the Doctor's choice to choose a name. Names have power. They have agency. They define you in other people's estimation. What does your name mean? Your name comes from something. It's derived from something. So when you are forced to make a choice, or when you feel empowered enough to make a choice, you're actually stepping outside the quote-unquote algorithm of all of the programming that have led you up to that choice. Like, I'm going to choose not to be religious, or I'm going to choose not to do this job. I'm going to choose to quit my job. I'm going to choose to be happy. I'm going to choose to drink that drink, or to smoke that cigarette. I'm going to make those choices. But it's terrifying when it's on you, when the onus is on you to make that choice for yourself.
Well, see, I would counter that by saying that a lot of the things you just described are not choices. They are programming. And whether it's something as profound as a belief in a religious doctrine or whatever, that we don't choose our beliefs, that those beliefs are what we are convinced of. And what we get convinced of is based on a number of outside factors. Our brains just simply follow where that information leads us and how it affects us on whether it's an intellectual level or an emotional level, a personal level. And it might be something as simple as picking up the cigarette or not. How much of that is actually a choice? How much of that is actually, a physical and mental and emotional compunction that either lands one way or the other? It's not always up to the individual because, hey, again, it's just programs upon programs upon programs.
I haven't, we haven't referenced music in a while, so I'm going to leave my thoughts with a musical quote, again from Rush, which I usually do. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
I love that.
You naysayers can complain all you like, but let's face it, sandwiches on the bridge would have livened up this episode considerably.
Sometimes, John, when we really dive into an episode, in my opinion, sometimes our deliberations are just as, if not more, entertaining than the episode itself, if I do say so myself.
Sometimes they leave a lot lacking. And
Sometimes.
That's where our listeners come in like, no. Try this.
And remember, if you have any comments you want to send to us, you can send it at missionlog@roddenberry.com. We can read them on Engage if you'd like. But for us, John and I are engaged in here, as we usually do at the end of the episode, talking about ex post facto. Did the episode hold up for us? And what morals and meanings and messages were we able to mine out of this episode, if any? So let's open up the floor, John, with you, and see how this episode held up, if it did.
All right. Well, I feel like we did tip our hands a little bit earlier on. And let me ease into this by just saying that there's something strange and just out of step about this episode, apart from the style, which we'll get to as well. We've touched on a little bit, but we'll talk about that as well. Sometimes I feel like it's a very good thing to just start a story in the middle. And you don't always need a ton of exposition. You just get to where the characters are right now. From the start, though, this whole premise raises way more questions than it answers, and those questions are more interesting than what's happening on screen. Like, how did Voyager get here? What was the first contact like? How are Tom and Harry ingratiating themselves with the locals? Like, there's all this stuff happening, and it's just so weird. Like, they've been there for weeks. And they just
space liquor, John. It's space liquor.
They had space liquor, and that ingratiated themselves to the Benians. Yeah, but it's just so... Like, the interesting thing about Voyager being stuck out in the Delta Quadrant is that everything is new. And these could have just been anybody. It's so... weird the way that part of the story was handled. And then you do have the issue of style. This experiment with noir does not work. We've talked before many times on this show about how sometimes Star Trek's format can stretch itself to touch on other genres. But not all of those can be a success. Sometimes Star Trek will do the horror or comedy or whatever, and it can work, but not all of them can work. And I want to take a second here because I think this is really important to remind everyone that Michael Piller wrote this episode. And it may go down as my least favorite Michael Piller script. But that's okay, because we need to get over this behavior that I see a lot online now of calling writers hacks and declaring that they don't possess talent if someone writes something that a viewer or a group of viewers don't like one day. Everyone, even professionals, are saddled with difficult premises, tight deadlines, problematic budgets, etc., and sometimes you just get a show that doesn't quite add up. And that is the case here. And it doesn't mean that Michael Piller was bad at his job. Michael Piller also turned in some of the absolute best moments and best episodes of Star Trek that have ever been committed to film. And here's another problem with this episode. And it relates to my first point about starting in the middle. We just came from such a strong episode with Eye of the Needle, where the strength was its focus and its look at the lives of the characters. And more importantly, it was an episode about the unique plight that Voyager has in being lost. This is a script that just feels like a rehash from TNG and barely acknowledges what makes Voyager's premise so refreshingly unique. So this is a flat-out no. For as many things as I've been on the fence about, still, this early in Voyager, this is a hard pass. Now, Norman, I'm going to leave it to you to save it and tell me why I'm wrong and why this episode should be more highly regarded. Are you going to do that?
D20 roll 1.
Oh, wow.
That is a critical fail. Okay. I can't save this episode. I want to be fair about something, and I want to bring something up because there was a really good comment on Facebook not too long ago when we were wrapping up Deep Space Nine, and one of the commenters said, I really hope, and he was addressing me personally, he said, Norm, I really hope that you turn your critical eye, as you did on Deep Space Nine, to Voyager when it comes out. And I responded back, I said, if the episode merits it, then I will.
Sure.
And I am.
Yeah.
Believe me, I am. And not specifically in this segment, in the next segment, in morals, meanings, and messages. But for me, this is a flat period, out period, no period when it comes to does this episode hold up. The only thing really redeeming about this episode is what John and I came to organically to agree on in our discussion points is the relationship between Kes and the Doctor. Mm-hmm. That arc so far has been absolutely marvelous to watch because it's so consistent. It's It's giving their characters agency. It's giving them exploration. They're growing from episode to episode. This is what you want to see in semi-serialized TV, and especially in TV that you're watching from the 1990s. But when it comes to the rest of this episode, as you said, John, there's a stylistic choice that did not work. Michael Piller is a legend in writing scripts and teleplays for Star Trek from the Next Generation to now. Just didn't work. It didn't work.
Yeah.
And things don't. That's just the way things are. That's the law of averages. You're going to have a 95 to 97% success rate, but that 2% that fails pretty hard. Right? So from the production of this episode to the sets to the costuming, the headpieces that we kind of were not big fans of at all, it just feels so last minute. It feels like someone forgot to tell everyone that they were shooting an episode this week.
Right?
Yeah. And I've said this before, and again, taking the Kes and Doctor very brief narrative arc out of this episode, I've said before on Mission Log that something doesn't matter in the grand scheme of the story if you can remove it from the narrative timeline and it changes nothing.
Yeah.
This episode could just disappear and it wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? In any respect. We learn nothing about anything about the characters. Nothing.
Yeah.
Right? And that's unfortunate, but I'm actually a lot more irate about this episode, not because of that, but because of one scene in particular that I find insulting as a fan of Star Trek. So going into morals and meanings and messages, because I want to hold on a second, John, let me get that Apple soapbox underneath my feet.
You have the floor. Yes.
Right. So in morals and meanings and messages, what I was trying to figure out is why this episode affected me so much from an emotional standpoint. I couldn't really find any morals, meanings, or messages. In fact, I found an anti-moral or an anti-meaning or an anti-message in this quite strongly. And I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to frame this in terms of, say, a title for this segment. Now, John, what do you like better? Space, the boring frontier, or boredom, the final frontier? Which resonates with you most for Tom Paris in this episode?
Well, I think honestly it's boredom, the final frontier, because Tom Paris has been to so many places, interesting places, done so many interesting things, surrounded by all these interesting people, and yet he chooses the path of most boredom. Which, it's frustrating.
All right, so think about it this way. So if you're looking at it from, say, a real-time equation, you're fighting for your life every day. You're fighting to get home. There's going to be either an ally or an enemy around every corner. Every decision that you make decides the outcome of whether or not your crew and your family on the ship is going to survive. And you know what? It's boring. Right?
Yeah.
Boring. They use the word boring to describe his commission in Starfleet, what his job is supposed to be on the planet.
Yeah.
Let's relive that quote. Okay, Paris said, "I was bored. You know how it is when two science guys get together." Let's double down on this with, "Look, I was just bored to tears in the other room, and I thought you might like to talk," when he's talking to Liddell. Not just bored.
This is a masterclass in how to completely undermine a character in a few lines of dialogue. And I know, and I'm sorry to derail you here for a moment.
Please, go ahead.
But honestly, this is the place where whatever listener hates it when we put on the writer's hat, damn it, I'm going to put on the writer's hat, because this would have been such an easy fix for an unremarkable episode, for an episode that still could not be saved, but you could actually save the character here. And that is that you could have Tom Paris working his ass off. You could have Tom Paris wholly invested in what's happening, but the work is very hard, and he's got to step out for a minute, and he's under pressure, and all these other attributes that actually elevate what he's doing instead of just, oh, science people are nerds. So they partially ruined it by going this direction of just having him be the womanizer. And look, he can have a sex drive. That's fine. He can be interested in her, and she can be interested in him. And yes, there are the interesting interpersonal politics of her being married, and that is inappropriate behavior, etc. Fine. Those are still believable, relatable things. For him to just screw up this whole mission by being bored and then recount that to his captain, dude, you get a demotion. Sorry, taking off my writer's hat.
No, I think those are great examples because there are those movies where somebody's so invested in the actual project that they're exhausted to the point of frustration or vice versa. And then it allows them to be vulnerable in that moment when they shouldn't.
Yes. Thank you.
Right?
Yes.
And that's where Liddell is taking advantage of Tom's actual investment in being, so wholly into the success of what they're doing in their mission. But aside from that, he just says, "I'm bored. What are you up to? You need me to light your cigarette? Okay, I'm really bored." So you're a Starfleet officer, dude. Like, and maybe it's me. Maybe I'm still naive in thinking that means something. But you're supposed to represent the best and the brightest that Earth and humanity has to offer. And now you're in a place where everything is dangerous and life or death is hanging in the balance of whether or not you're going to get home or whether or not you're going to, find your end in the Delta Quadrant. Why did this get let slide through?
Yeah.
Like, why did the writers let that slide through? Again, is it me? Or do I have a completely different understanding of what's expected from a Starfleet officer? I mean, if it was, say, like the Maquis, even if it was Chakotay, I'd be like, okay, I get it. You're wrestling with being a Starfleet officer again. I get that. A non-Starfleet officer, like, say, a Maquis officer, sure, they're not invested the way that a Starfleet officer is invested. Remember what Janeway said in Caretaker? They're so disciplined that they will follow my orders as Starfleet officers.
Yeah.
That means something.
Yeah.
So, bottom line, John, is that in this episode in particular, and your trivia alludes to this, they don't know who Tom is.
Yeah.
The writers don't know who Tom is or what Robbie is capable of as an actor.
Well,
this far into the series.
And what's worse, it's not just knowing who he is, it's then undermining the values you can bring to that character. So they went the farther extreme here. Yeah.
So I really hope that we see Tom as the character, Robbie as the actor, just get better material to work with. The writers are better than this. The actor and the character has the potential to be better than this. Let's see him become a three-dimensional character as opposed to, this two-dimensional paper flyboy.
Yeah. Yeah, two-dimensional is exactly the right way to describe, all the characters here, because I wasn't invested in the Wren saga, the Wren family saga, or what was happening with the rest of the Benians, or any of that. It was just these invented scenarios that did not work. And speaking of invented scenarios, that is the problem with the episode, and that's why we're using our morals, meanings, messages segment here to really just kind of, go off on the shortcomings. Star Trek is Star Trek, and it's not a procedural. And even though sometimes you can take story aspects, stylistic aspects from other types of entertainment and transplant them into Star Trek, you still have to be able to keep our interest with the characters, and the characters just fail here. With the exception of, again, that excellent scene with Cass and the Doctor. Tuvok is an MVP here. I feel like there's not enough Janeway, but we do get a couple of strong moments out of Janeway. But you've taken characters that have so much potential here. As you jokingly mentioned, Harry Kim just gets the short shrift right away. Right. And then you undermine any of the good qualities that Paris has from the very beginning.
It's interesting, though. Would you agree that in the way that the narrative unfolded, like all of the characters, maybe but Tom, who is the central character of this episode, got better arcs than he did?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, and that's the thing, it's like this is a kind of storytelling where it really is just, okay, we got to rush to solve the mystery because this is going to be over in 45 minutes. But the problem is you have to build all the stuff that is the mystery before you get to the reveal in Act 4. So along the way, we got to talk a little bit about fairness and punishment and some other interesting ideas that Star Trek has already handled in a much more interesting and profound way before. Ultimately, what this story is about is just finding the technical reason that Tom Paris is innocent. So it's Columbo in space. And nice. I'm not saying that those ideas or attempts are all without merit, but they fail in every respect for this episode.
Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you would like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and for more Star Trek news and discussion, visit trekmovie.com.
On the next Mission Log, Emanations.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com. Special thanks to consulting producers, Adam Brusky, Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, John Mann, Mike Richards, and Mike Schabel. I think we finally have the answer. This episode was both basic and fatal. End transmission.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.